Environmental and workers' rights groups have filed a lawsuit against the EPA, alleging it failed to consider risks to public health when it reapproved two herbicides. Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo are sprayed on crops across the U.S. to control weeds. And in January of this year, the EPA renewed registrations for both products in 34 states. But critics say its continued use threatens endangered species, native plants, and local waterways. Carey Gillam joins us now. She's the author of and the managing editor of the new Lede and a contributor for The Guardian. Apologies for boffing that, but that's a lot of accomplishments that you do. All right, so I grew up in Colorado. I did 4-H. Some friends had farms. But what is it about these specific herbicides that people are really concerned about, and are they different than other herbicides that folks have been using, for decades?
Right. Well, yes and no. So 2,4-D is the active ingredient in these herbicides that you mentioned that this controversy is about, Enlist and Enlist Duo. In Enlist Duo, you have another herbicide as well. You have one called glyphosate. And both of these have been in use for decades. Glyphosate was introduced in the 1970s by a company called Monsanto, and Dow Chemical brought us 2,4-D. Many years ago. It's been used since the 1950s in agriculture. It's found in a lot of home and garden products that people use. But the shift and the problem is that the use of these chemicals dramatically changed recently. And what Monsanto brought us in the 1990s was genetically engineered crops. And these were types of crops that you could spray directly over the top with the chemicals, glyphosate. And now we have crops that were introduced in the last decade that you can spray directly over the top with 2,4-D. And what has happened because of these genetically engineered crops that allow farmers to spray directly over the top of their growing crops, which is really a remarkable technology, right? They can spray their whole field, the weeds will die, but the crops will not.
Because they've been genetically engineered to be resistant to these chemicals, right?
Exactly. And so that's the idea. And it sounds like a really wonderful thing. And, indeed, it started out that way. But a number of problems have emerged primarily because the use of these chemicals has skyrocketed with this when you use it in combination with these genetically engineered seeds. And 2,4-D use is up, the government estimates about 240%.
So what does that mean? What is this? We're running out of a bit of time here, but what does that mean for our food supply, and why did the EPA reapprove their use in the first place?
Well, farmers claim, and the companies that sell these chemicals and fund a lot of the large farm groups claim that they're necessary, that they need them to help fight weeds. One big problem, however, is the more chemicals you spray on the fields, the more the weeds become resistant, and thus you spray more and more, and the weeds become more resistant. And we now have millions of acres of weeds that are resistant to these herbicides. And so, again, the chemical companies are coming up with incentives for farmers to use more and more. And the environmental groups say you're affecting pollinators, you're affecting water supply, you're affecting the health of the soil. And roughly 40% of Americans, according to CDC data, have 2,4-D in their urine, and roughly 80%, according to CDC data, have glyphosate in their urine. So this is affecting people who aren't even farmers, who aren't even out there spraying this, are being exposed to these chemicals.
All right, well, that's very concerning. Thank you for educating us this morning. Carey Gillam, we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.